All right, in this video, I wanted to give a brief overview of this idea of plant phylogenetics. When we discuss phylogenetics, we're really thinking about the characteristics that a group of organisms have and how those characteristics evolved over time. And then we put that together visually so that we can have a graphical representation of the evolution of traits within that group of organisms. So let's go ahead and get started. So when we think about plant phylogenetics, we break plants into four major groups. So I just want to introduce the names of the major groups, and then we'll put them together on a phylogenetic tree and think about how they're related and what characteristics they have in common and which characteristics some of them evolved over time. So the four groups we will be discussing when we think about plants are the bryophytes. After the bryophytes, we'll be thinking about a group we call the seedless vascular plants. After considering the seedless vascular plants, we'll consider another group called the gymnosperms. And the final group we'll consider are the angiosperms, or in some cases you might see them just simply referred to as flowering plants. So we want to organize these four groups of plants. Each group will have a set of characteristics in common with themselves within that group, and then they'll be related to the other groups in some way. So we'll put all these groups of plants onto a phylogenetic tree like this one. And I've shown this tree in a couple other videos, but I just want to think about how this tree is laid out before we discuss the specific traits that each of these groups have. So as with any phylogenetic tree, if you find the root, that represents the evolutionary past, the origin of all the living things that are on the tree. So this tree is just related to plants, and so the root relates to the precursor organism that all plants evolved from. And so this first branch coming off the tree, closest to the base, connects to these charophytes. Charophytes are a group of aquatic photosynthetic protists that it's believed that plants have evolved from. So these charophytes, they are not plants. They don't have some of the characteristics that we consider being essential to being classified as a plant. But it's thought that all the plants, the rest of these things, evolved from an organism that shared a common ancestor backwards in evolutionary time. So previously in another video I talked about the terrestrial adaptations that all plants have. So on this tree, at this dot, we say here's a point in the evolutionary past where plants evolved this set of terrestrial adaptations which allowed them to colonize the land and be successful. And so whenever we add a trait like this, like terrestrial adaptations, that trait should remain in every organism that comes after that point on the tree. So we've talked about terrestrial adaptations being present in every single plant. Well, all the plants are on these branches on the tree after this point, so they all have those traits. Okay, so we were going to talk about these four specific groups of plants, and they're represented on the top. So we'll go from right to left. Over here on the right are the flowering plants. Again, sometimes we'll also call those angiosperms. Then the next branch backwards contains the gymnosperms. And then if we go back another branch, here we're actually going to combine two groups together. Here we're going to combine the club mosses and these ferns. They're together in a group we call the seedless vascular plants. And if we go back another couple of branches, here we have two branches combined as well. The liverworts, the mosses, and the hornworts are all together in a group we call the bryophytes. So when we look at this evolutionary tree, we want to think about how we can look at these groups, the bryophytes, the seedless vascular plants, the gymnosperms, and the angiosperms, and using the tree, place on here important adaptations or characteristics that each of these groups includes. So we said again that all of them, the bryophytes, the seedless vascular plants, the gymnosperms, and the flowering plants, they have the same set of terrestrial adaptations. And then we'll think about what they've added along the way. So in terms of the bryophytes, they're the simplest plants. They're the most primitive of these plants. And really, their only adaptations are these terrestrial adaptations. So plants evolved, they gained these terrestrial adaptations, and the original plants look something like what we see in bryophytes today. So bryophytes don't have any additional characteristics that we'll be thinking about or putting on this tree. But if we trace our way up the tree and we pass the branches to the bryophytes, here, in between bryophytes and seedless vascular plants, we're going to add a new trait that the seedless vascular plants, the gymnosperms, and the angiosperms all have. The trait we're going to add is vascular tissue. Vascular tissue is sort of like a circulatory system for the plant. It allows the plant to transport water and other nutrients through the stems, through the shoots of the plant. And by evolving vascular tissue, plants were able to grow taller because all of their tissue no longer needed to be in contact with the source of water. So with the evolution of vascular tissue, plants could grow much taller and get more specialized, and they became much more successful. So seedless vascular plants, this group, they have this vascular tissue, and they have all the terrestrial adaptations that we've talked about previously. All right, so if we continue up the evolutionary tree here, we've added the vascular tissue. Again, all the organisms at the end of the tree will have vascular tissue as we go. But as we pass the seedless vascular plant branches, we reach another point on the tree where we're going to add another characteristic that the gymnosperms and the flowering plants have. And that characteristic that we're going to add at this point on the tree are seeds and pollen. So gymnosperms have seeds and they have pollen, as do the angiosperms. They also have seeds and they use pollen. But the seedless vascular plants and the bryophytes lack these structures. All right, so seeds and pollen, they helped these plants be more successful in their reproduction in different environments. Seeds and pollen sort of break a connection that the plants had with very moist environments. The bryophytes and the seedless vascular plants needed a lot of water to accomplish reproduction. But now the gymnosperms, with their seeds and their pollen, break that connection between water and reproduction. And gymnosperms were able to reproduce in many, many different environments around the world where the seedless vascular plants and the bryophytes cannot survive. So gymnosperms and angiosperms both have seeds and pollen. And as we go up this tree, we're going to pass the gymnosperm branch, and on this branch that terminates with the angiosperms, we're going to add one more trait to the tree. That trait is the presence of flowers and fruit. Flowers and fruit also aided in reproduction for these plants, and flowers and fruit can be credited with much of the diversity and dispersal of angiosperms that we see around us. Angiosperms are by far the most successful plants, and it's because they have all of these traits, flowers and fruit, seeds and pollen, vascular tissue, and all the terrestrial adaptations, that they are so successful, and they're by far the most dominant plant life form on Earth. So that's our plant phylogenetic tree. Again, we can break the plants into these four groups: the bryophytes, the seedless vascular plants, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. And along the tree, we can place these adaptations in between the groups that were added as evolution progressed in the plant, in plants. So to sum up, let's just talk about these four plant groups really quickly and what each one of them has. So again, the bryophytes, they're the simplest plants. They're most like the original ancestral plant that first began living on land. So they're sort of primitive plants. And all of the adaptations they have are the set of terrestrial adaptations that allowed them to live on land, but no additional adaptations. All right, the next group was the seedless vascular plants. Their name tells us that they added this vascular tissue. So they added vascular tissue, that allowed them to grow larger and be more successful. The next group are the gymnosperms. Gymnosperms added two traits. They added seeds and pollen, which again made them more successful in their reproduction, which allowed them to live in many other different places in the world. And then the last group were the angiosperms, the flowering plants. Again, they added fruits and flowers, which further increased their reproductive success. So I hope that helps lay out sort of a map of how these plants evolved over time and what traits they added, leading up to, again, the most successful plants around us today, those angiosperms. So as always, let me know if you have any questions, if there's any way I can help, and I will talk to you again soon.